Welcome to 5 Decades, One Mission, a series of 6 episodes celebrating the golden anniversary of 2 key 1975 events that gave rise to the U.S. animal rights movement. The first event was the publication of Animal Liberation by Australian philosopher Peter Singer, which introduced the concept of animal rights to American audiences. The other was the World Vegetarian Congress that provided the troops for the U.S. animal rights movement and would develop in the years that followed. Several historical factors made 1975 the watershed year. There was practically no animal rights and very little vegetarian activity in the U.S. before 1975. On the other hand, the 1975 World Vegetarian Congress spurred the formation of 60 local vegetarian societies and publication of a dozen books. The publication of Animal Liberation motivated animal rights activists who then inspired the vegetarian community to adopt the animal rights concept. When the two groups got together at the 1981 Action for Life conference in Allentown, Pennsylvania, the animal rights contingency took over. The vegetarians gave up their ice cream and cheese and became the troops of the new animal rights movement. That conference became the physical birthplace of the U.S. animal rights movement.
In 1972, during a wastewater inventory assignment at a Midwestern slaughterhouse, I came across piles of heads, legs, and other discarded animal body parts. They brought back flashbacks of human hair, glasses, and shoes I saw during my visit to the Auschwitz Museum. They conveyed the nightmarish notion that we may be doing to animals what the Nazis did to us, and the dreadful realization that I had turned from victim of the Holocaust to an oppressor of animals.
I had seen a video of what happens to animals inside of slaughterhouses and factory farms and other places where animals are exploited, and I just kept thinking to myself, what would I do if those were my dogs? If they were my dogs who were being hung upside down and having their throats cut, if they were my dogs in cages so small they couldn't even turn around for their entire lives, what would I do? And I knew the answer was that I would be willing to do almost anything to prevent that.
So I did write quite a lengthy review article, not just a book review, and he did publish it. He published it in this issue, April 5th, 1973, of the New York Review of Books, and actually has, let's see, Animal Liberation on the cover there. That's the article that I wrote inside. So that was 1973, and that had a significant reaction, I think, because it was published in the New York Review of Books. So I got quite a few letters, positive letters, mostly from people encouraging me with this line of thinking. Because I had contact with the New York Review of Books, I wrote to Robert Silvers and asked him if he could suggest a publisher or a literary agent who would find me a publisher. And he said, well, since this article had appeared, in a sense that the germ of the book had appeared in the New York Review of Books, they would be interested in publishing it themselves. And that's what happened, and that's how Animal Liberation was published.
In 1973, in Sweden, they issued an official invitation, and the International Vegetarian Union Executive Committee thought it was a good idea and approved the prospect of doing a congress in the United States in 1975. I gave them 2 years in order to make the arrangements for the congress and become a communicating force for North America. The ad hoc committee that was going to do the 75 Congress formed the North American Vegetarian Society, which was incorporated in January 1974.
And when that happened in August of that year in Orono, Maine, it was like being backstage at a rock concert. Everywhere I looked, there was another person that I admired and wanted to ask their autograph, but I also wanted to be cool.
The 1975 World Vegetarian Congress became a truly life-changing experience, and I still tear up with the recollection 5 decades later. There were hundreds of people of different nationalities, races, religions, genders, ages, dress, and economic stations. But we all shared one crucial commonality. We did not eat animals. These were my people. They welcomed me with open arms. I finally felt that I belonged. I could now proudly come out as a vegetarian. I immediately realized that this could indeed become the launching platform for my resolution to end the use of animals for food.
Our movement's most dramatic and celebrated early campaign in the mid-1970s was attempting to stop the annual slaughter of baby seals for their prized white fur in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The campaign was led by Fund for the Animals president Cleveland Amory. In 1976, Greenpeace board member Paul Watson intensified the campaign by leading a group of activists in spraying the seals with a harmless red dye, which rendered their pelts worthless. The following year, he was expelled from the Greenpeace board for physically disarming one of the sealers. That only provoked Paul to become more active. In 1977, he talked Cleveland Amory into buying him a ship that could actually sail into the Gulf of St. Lawrence and step up the defense of seals. This ship was named the Sea Shepherd and served as the launch pad for Paul's Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. In 1979, the Sea Shepherd, with Paul and Cleveland on board, sailed into the Atlantic to confront pirate whaling operations, which have continued for many years and many ships since.
But what the millions of people who went to that museum had no idea about was that on the upper floors of that building, under the auspices of the American Museum of Natural History, scientists were doing really quite horrible experiments on cats. They were blinding them and they were removing their sense of smell, and they were seeing how this affected their sexual behavior. Henry and his small group started running a campaign which got quite a lot of publicity. They would stand outside the museum on the weekends, on busy days when people wanted to go, and they would hand out flyers about what's going on upstairs in the museum. So it's not like they were trying to cure cancer or any other major disease. It was purely trying to find out the way in which, cats use different senses in order to behave sexually. The museum, I think, realized fairly soon that it was in some degree of trouble with this. And the campaign spread, got a lot of newspaper attention. Eventually, the National Institutes of Health, I think it was, who were funding the research with a research grant, decided that they were getting a lot of negative publicity for that, and the experiments ended. And that was the first time in the United States that animal protesters had stopped an actual experiment on animals.
The case that initiated PETA was an undercover investigation at a place called the Institute for Behavioral Research, which was in Silver Spring, Maryland, in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And Alex Pacheco, who is one of PETA's co-founders, along with Ingrid Newkirk, he took a volunteer position at this facility and was horrified by what he saw, because there were monkeys kept in tiny, barren, bleak metal cages with a wire floor. That's where they lived. The experiments themselves were painful. The monkeys were put in devices where they were totally restrained, and there was no veterinary care for these animals. This information was shared with the media, was shared with members of Congress, people in prominent positions, and so on. This was the first time Americans were seeing what goes on with animals in laboratory. So many things, cruelties that we just cannot imagine, and were it not for the heroic and self-sacrificing work being done by the Animal Liberation Front.
Although farmed animals account for 99% of animal abuse, for the first 2 decades, our movement was pretty much focused on vivisection, with some early attention to slaughter of baby seals and wearing of furs. The farmed animal issue was first introduced to the U.S. animal rights movement in 1980 by Jim Mason and Peter Singer with their revolutionary photo book, Animal Factories. Farm remained the sole organization fighting for farmed animals' liberation until Henry Spira joined us with his coalition to abolish factory farming in 1985. Then Karen Davis joined the struggle with her United Poultry Concerns in 1990.
Well, when Animal Liberation was published, there were some people who took it seriously, fortunately, but there were also people who just tried to ridicule it, tried to laugh it off and said, well, animal rights? Animals don't have rights. We know that rights are for humans. So it took some time to get across the idea that there really is a case for saying that animals have rights, or that animals should have rights that they are not legally recognized as having now, that we should not be treating them in the way that they are. Has now become, I think, a widely shared view. to the extent that whenever the American public get a chance to vote on these issues, they actually vote for much better conditions for animals. And I think the American public regards the animal movement quite positively. The problem is that American politics is essentially corrupt because lobbying has such a huge influence in the American political system. Money has a huge influence, much more, I would say, than in any of the other democratic countries I'm familiar with, much more than in Australia, where I'm talking to you from now, much more than in England, where I lived for several years, much more than in other European countries that I know about, where they have been able to get important changes for animals through parliament.
When I became vegan, the thought of somebody doing that was completely foreign. You would think of this person as somebody who would obviously be a social outcast, somebody who you didn't want to hang around or come to your parties and so on. Now, though, many of the most famous athletes are vegan. Many of the most successful athletes are vegan. Many celebrities and other influencers are vegan, and they show that this can be a cool, popular thing to do. At the same time, we are the most inventive and innovative species that this planet has ever seen, and we are capable of inventing new ways of doing things that render the old ways obsolete. And so I am optimistic that we will find ways to limit some of the damage that we have done. For those animals who experience torture and will never live to see that day, my heart breaks. For those species who went extinct already and won't survive to see that future, my heart breaks. But I do not consign myself to the pessimism of thinking that we cannot change, because we have changed in the past and we will continue changing in the future. It's not self-executing. It doesn't happen on its own. Not one of these people who believes that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. Sometimes it is bent toward justice, but it doesn't just naturally bend toward justice. But through action and strategic persuasion that we can engage in, I truly believe that we can invent our way out of so many of the problems that we face, whether it's animal exploitation, climate change, and so on.